The late 1990s were a golden age for 3D platformers, with developers pushing the limits of what gaming could achieve in expansive, colorful worlds. Among the genre's brightest stars was Banjo-Kazooie, a charming and innovative title that blended humor, creativity, and exploration into a timeless adventure. Released by Rare in 1998 for the Nintendo 64, Banjo-Kazooie followed the quirky duo of Banjo, a laid-back bear, and Kazooie, his sassy bear companion, as they set off to rescue Banjo's sister from the clutches of the wicked witch Gruntilda. With its sprawling levels, clever puzzles, and unforgettable characters, the game redefined what a platformer could be, earning it a place as one of the genre's greatest achievements. Today, we're diving into the history of Banjo-Kazooie, exploring its development and its enduring legacy in gaming. So grab your backpack, flap your wings, and join us for today's whimsical trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 253rd episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in game history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are journeying into the whimsical world of Banjo-Kazooie, Rare's beloved 1998 platformer that took players on an unforgettable adventure. With its charming characters, creative levels, and unforgettable music, Banjo-Kazooie defined an era of gaming. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably try to use Kazooie as a backpack instead of a partner. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you think you'd help save 2D, or would you just get distracted chasing Mumbo tokens?
I'd probably get distracted for quite some time, get tired of it, and then go back to 2D.
Also joining us, once again, for time number, 8, 9? We should have looked that up last time. We didn't look that up last time, so we're probably off by one. Returning guest, Ryan Shepard. Ryan!
Hello, hello.
What's your favorite part of this game? Are you a musical note guy?
The music does absolutely slap.
But what is your favorite part?
Probably just the wide variety of different worlds. You find out, so you start out in this opening kind of, call it an introduction area, fighting like a carrot, right? And then, later on, you're just fighting all kinds of different creatures in their quest to save the sister.
The sister, indeed. So variety.
Yeah. It at the time it out Mario 64.
It did indeed. That is something I read. Rob, are you familiar with this game?
I have seen it. I'm not all that familiar with it. So we're going to say mildly.
I missed this one. Ryan, you may be the only one with familiarity here.
Yeah, at the back in the day, as they say. I did play this to completion. I believe I may have 100% of it, if not darn near that. Big fan of the game as well as the franchise in general.
That's good to know. Well, today we're going to learn all about it, where it comes from. I did not know its origins. Ryan, do you have an inkling where it comes from? Rob, anyone?
Nope.
Development studio.
Woo! Which one, though? No, just kidding.
Probably nothing very common. It must be rather rare.
Oh, look at him. You cue him up and he knocks him out of the park. This is actually a really fascinating story. It evolved from something completely different than what it ended up being. It did not start out as Banjo-Kazooie. And so it's a really fascinating story. But before we get into it, Let's take a few moments and have Rob here share with our listeners what else happened during this current week in gaming history.
Sure thing. Well, kicking it off on July 5th, 1950, Bandai was founded in Japan, originally specializing in toy cars and plastic models before growing into one of the most influential names in global entertainment. Over the years, Bandai became synonymous with some of pop culture's biggest franchises, launching iconic brands like Gundam, Power Rangers, and Tamagotchi. These captivated generations of fans across the world. And as video games rose in popularity, Bandai expanded into game development and publishing, eventually emerging with arcade giant Namco in 2005 to form Bandai Namco Entertainment. The merger created a powerhouse that blended toys, games, and media into a single creative force, responsible for hit series like Tekken, Dragon Ball, and Pac Man. From plastic models to pixels, Bandai's legacy spans industries and continues to shape both the toy and gaming worlds today. We learned more about the company back in episode 236 when we talked all about their handheld, the Wonder Swan. So check it out.
Hey, the Wonder Swan. Gunpei Yokoi's latest final project, period.
Latest final?
Latest final project. That's how you say that.
Absolutely.
Love
It
me
sure
some
is,
Wonder
dude.
Swan.
Do you?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Big Wonder Swan guy, huh?
Big Wonder Swan guy. Absolutely.
Fair enough. Well, thinking of things you're a big fan of, on July 1st, 1991, Duke Nukem was released by Apogee Software, marking the debut of one of gaming's most over-the-top anti-heroes. In this side-scrolling platformer, players stepped into the boots of Duke Nukem, a muscle-bound, wisecracking action hero on a mission to stop the nefarious Dr. Proton and his army of robotic tech bots. With colorful EGA graphics, explosive gameplay, and a heavy dose of pop culture parody, the game stood out in a crowded genre and quickly built a fanbase. While the original stuck to classic platforming roots, it laid the groundwork for what would become a legendary franchise, eventually culminating in the genre-defining Duke Nukem 3D. With his cigar, shades, and endlessly quotable one-liners, Duke Nukem became a symbol of 90s gaming attitude and left an unmistakable mark on gaming history.
Both a good mark and a bad mark. No
That
doubt.
it did. And we did talk about Duke Nukem 3D, so if you're interested, figure out the episode and go listen.
We talked about Duke Nukem Forever for the bad mark.
Forever. You're right. That's right. My bad.
No, we did both.
You're right. My bad. I was saying I forgot, Dave. Jeez. I'm sorry. I'm all out of bubblegum.
That's the best line. That's from a movie, but it coming in the Duke Nukem, excellent line.
That's the line that I associate with that franchise. You're saying that line's not even from the game?
No, it's from an 80s action movie.
Well, my whole life perspective has been shifted.
Yeah.
God damn it.
Let's see. It's from. I'll have to take a look, but it's definitely from a movie. Let's see. Here's if you go to Know Your Memes, it literally says, "Well, many believe the quote originated from the video game Duke Nukem 3D. It actually comes from the 1988 movie They Live. In the movie, a man named Nada, played by Roddy Piper, finds a pair of sunglasses which lets him see that aliens are disguised as humans and discovers hidden subliminal messages everywhere. Nada then steals a police shotgun and whilst evading the police stumbles into a bank proclaiming, 'I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum.'" Roddy Piper!
Wow. Damn. That's good.
Yeah, alright.
All right. Next up, on July 3rd, 2002, Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos was released by Blizzard Entertainment, redefining the real-time strategy genre with its cinematic storytelling, diverse factions, and RPG-inspired mechanics. Set in the high fantasy world of Azeroth, the game featured 4 playable races: humans, orcs, undead, and night elves, each with distinct playstyles and rich lore. Warcraft 3 introduced powerful hero units that could level up, equip items, and turn the tide of battle, adding a new layer of strategy and narrative depth. Its epic single-player campaign unfolded through intertwining storylines and marked the rise of iconic characters like Arthas, Thrall, and Sylvanas. Beyond its critical acclaim, Warcraft 3 left a lasting legacy thanks to its robust map editor, which helped spawn custom games like Defense of the Ancients, Dota, the foundation of the modern MOBA genre, which, we may have talked about.
Maybe.
And over 2 decades later, its influence is still felt across strategy games, esports, and beyond.
And beyond.
But no Infinity.
Nope. Ryan, I don't know the answer to that. Were you into the Warcraft RTS games?
My introduction was on the StarCraft side of things, so just a little bit later, I think.
Yeah. I that was what I thought. Because I remember when we went to college, StarCraft was the thing we were all playing. But I was unaware if you had introduced yourself to Blizzard prior to that. Fun. I learned something new about you, dude.
Zerg rushes were definitely my intro. Yep.
Damn straight, as they should be. On July 3rd, 2003, Sony released the iToy for the PlayStation 2, bringing motion-controlled gaming to living rooms long before it became mainstream. Developed by Sony's London studio, the iToy was a USB camera that used real-time video input to let players interact with games using their bodies. No controller was required. Its launch title, iToy Play, featured a quirky mix of minigames that had players washing windows, boxing ninjas, and goofing off in front of the screen, making it an instant hit with families and party gamers alike. While it may seem simple by today's standards, the iToy was a bold step forward in interactive design, laying early groundwork for the motion sensing wave that would follow with the Nintendo Wii and PlayStation Move. Fun, accessible, and ahead of its time, the iToy helped show the world that your body could be the controller.
Also in that realm would be the Xbox Kinect later on as well.
Ooh,
Indeed.
Yes.
Very good catch. I was thinking the same, but then I was like, nah, everyone's got to know about the Kinect. But then I realized there might be listeners who never really knew what a Kinect was.
True statement.
So if you don't know what the Kinect is, or the iToy, or the Wii, or the Move, go educate yourself.
Yes.
Or listen to us, because that's what we're here for.
Or that.
Yeah, see, plug for the show, Dave.
Yep, good job.
You're getting lackadaisical.
We're turning you into an actual podcaster yet.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
Last up for this week in gaming history, on June 30th, 2014, Divinity Original Sin was released by Larian Studios, breathing new life into the classic computer RPG with a modern twist. Developed as a prequel to Divine Divinity, the game gave players control of 2 customizable source hunters and a richly detailed fantasy world teeming with magic, mystery, and turn-based tactical combat. What set Original Sin apart was its deep interactivity. Nearly everything in the environment could be manipulated, and conversations, quests, and outcomes shifted based on player choices. With flexible co-op gaming, branching dialogue, and intricate systems, the game felt like a true tabletop RPG brought to life. Initially crowdfunded through Kickstarter, it exceeded expectations and became a breakout success, revitalizing interest in the CRPG genre. Its critical acclaim and fan reception laid the groundwork for an even more ambitious sequel, solidifying Larian as a major force in role-playing game development.
And setting them on the course to be able to make Baldur's Gate 3, which expanded on all of that, too.
Indeed it did, and I can finally say that I have touched the game. So,
Ooh.
let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Good for you.
Yes, sir.
All right, gentlemen. Today, we are filling in one more gap in British video game developer Rare's library. Now, listeners, if you'd like to learn more about the company, we've done countless episodes on various games they developed. Most recently, we covered Battletoads in episode 249, Perfect Dark in 247. We also looked at GoldenEye 007 in episode 52 and Donkey Kong Country in 117. And our story today picks up in the midst of Donkey Kong Country's success. Now, if you'll recall, we've talked at length about how Rare was absolutely prolific was an absolutely prolific developer during the 8-bit era. During that period, they developed 60 different games over a 5-year period. That's 60, 47 of which were for the Nintendo Entertainment System. And one of those games was what, Ryan?
Mario 64.
No. RC Pro AM.
RC Pro Am 1.
What? Yes, yes. We were talking about it before we just got on air today.
Oh.
Ooh. So Rare was just churning out the games during the Nintendo era, right? And when the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the SNES, was announced, Rare wasn't really ready to make the jump to a new generation. This period, the 8-bit period, though, was a really successful period for the company, and making all these games had them pretty much printing money to use on whatever they saw fit. And what they saw fit to use it on was a number of silicon graphics workstations that could make 3D models. These were these big commercial workstations. They were not personal computers. They were state of the art computers that could work in 3D at a period in which nobody was really developing in 3D. And to be fair, they weren't really developing in 3D either. Using those workstations, Rare created a boxing game demo, and they presented that demo to Nintendo, with whom they had built a great relationship with while making 47 Nintendo games over 5 years, right? And essentially, what they were doing, to kind of sum it up where they were at the time, is that they were using these workstations to do all the 3D heavy lifting, which is what we call pre-rendering, and then they were transferring said image over to the Super Nintendo. And so, to kind of boil down the technology, make it easier for you to understand, it's the difference between asking the Super Nintendo to make a 3D image versus asking it to just display a picture of something that's 3D. Displaying a still picture is a lot easier for any device than actually having to make a 3D background or a 3D model or anything like that, right? And so it was letting them bring actual 3D onto this SNES. So Nintendo loves the demo, right? They see it as the future. No one had done it yet. No one had been able to do 3D modeling on a 16-bit system. And so Nintendo decides to very heavily invest into Rare. They first buy a 25% stake in the company. Gradually, that stake increases to 49%, which makes Rare a second party developer for Nintendo. And basically, with this relationship, both financially and otherwise, Nintendo just opened up their roster of characters to Rare and said, pick one and make us a game just like that. So the founders of Rare, Doug and Tim Stamper, they want Donkey Kong. So we get the first game made using this 3D method, Donkey Kong Country. Pretty much before they were finished with Donkey Kong Country, they had been soliciting employees for ideas of a sequel to it in case their game was successful. And as we know, since we've done a whole episode on it, Donkey Kong Country was an absolute success. It sold over 9 million copies. It's one of the best-selling titles on the Super Nintendo platform. I think it's number 2 or number 3, if I'm not mistaken. So, of course, because of money, a sequel was greenlit, and that was developed and released as Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy Kong's Quest in November of 1995. But that was not the only idea that Rare had planned on developing in the wake of the first Donkey Kong Country. While they did want to capitalize on its success and start a series, they also had the desire to apply their advanced rendering technique, this 3D modeling technology, to a game that was not a platformer. And so for this idea, the team settled on developing a role-playing game. the team at Rare, they were all fans of role-playing games. They were fans of JRPGs. They were fans of LucasArts adventure games. And so, inspired by JRPGs and inspired by LucasArts, they felt that they could create their own role-playing game that had that, like, unique Rare touch, right? Because Rare was really known for that. They were known for taking something that someone else did and doing it really well. That's the best way to put it, you know? Because they were leaning towards making this is where they started, a fairy tale-esque magical themed game. They started the project under the code name Dream, which was meant to represent that concept. And so in 1995, the team that created Donkey Kong Country 2 started development on this project, and Rare announced a game titled Dream Land of the Giants to the world. In what was created, Land of the Giants, or Project Dream, was about a boy named Edson and his pets, a dog named Dinger and a parrot named Billy. And as part of the story, there's a band of pirates going around searching for a substance called floaty that would allow their ships to fly. And Edson somehow gets in trouble with these pirates, and he sets off on a journey to help he and his girlfriend escape them, right?
Pirates are bad news in general.
Pirates are bad news in general. Ryan,
Hey,
do you
Hondo Onaka's pretty cool. Come on.
Ryan, do you remember Project Dream at all?
I only kind of remember it from you talking about it now. Like, I was sitting here thinking, like, is he making this up?
Or
No.
how does it apply? Yeah.
Yeah, because this is, RPG Banjo-Kazooie is not.
No, RPG Banjo-Kazooie is not. As the team got further and further into development, the game obviously grew, and there were concerns that it wouldn't be able to fit onto the Super Nintendo cartridge. And in the midst of that, the Nintendo 64 was released, which kind of made that a redundant point. And honestly, it also made the rendering process obsolete because, as we know, the Nintendo 64 was a powerful enough system to actually render in 3D. And so, as part of the transition over to Nintendo 64, which the team decided on, moving the game over to the N64, they began to realize that they limited their broad appeal by sticking to a fairy tale theme. And so as they rebuilt the game, they moved away from the fairy tale dream of Project Dream, and they leaned into the pirate theme that became Land of the Giants. That's where we get the Land of the Giants from. They transitioned from fairy tale to pirate, and it became Project Dream to Dreamland of the Giants. And as they worked out the pirate theme, the scope of the game grew. As they began to work out the story of the band of pirates, the team struggled with their main character Edson because suddenly he was becoming less important, which is really problematic for your main character, right? So they began to explore alternatives that they could build their entire game around. They tried a few different characters. One was a rabbit, but there was one minor character in Project Dream that the team really liked, and that was a bear named Banjo who wore a backpack, trainers, and a cap. When they landed on this, they quickly reworked some of the game using Banjo the bear as their main character. But at this point, the game was still a 3D, like an RPG game. It wasn't even quite completely 3D. They couldn't figure out how to get the N64 to render all of the sprites they needed, so they kind of had it at this point as a pseudo 3D engine that they had built. And so Dream slowly becomes a 2.5D platformer, this kind of side-scrolling platformer in which Banjo could also move into the background. So you get the 2.5 because in time, aside from going back and forth, you could play with depth a little bit too, right? And so they start working out moves that they want in this game. And one that they requested was a double jump. But they thought that a bear looked really weird, running really fast and flying through the air. So they came up with the idea of a pair of wings that would appear from his backpack every time he did the double jump. And like I said, they also want him to be able to run very fast. So that idea was extended to a pair of legs that would extend from the bottom of the backpack. And eventually, they came to understand that they could create a whole new character that lived in Banjo's backpack, and this became Kazooie. So at this point, they were tentatively calling this game, which was still kind of a role playing title, 2.5D Banjo and Kazooie.
All right.
All right. Once you get to the point where you've got wings and legs, or like just throw a head on and make it the whole bird.
Make it a whole bird. Why not? Why not? I mean, I don't know though. A backpack with wings and legs would have been kind of funny too. In 2.5D Banjo and Kazooie, Banjo collects the fruit of 5 different fruit houses: oranges, grapes, lemons, bananas, and cherries. They also wanted to borrow the concept of barrels from Donkey Kong Country, but instead of barrel, they want to use a variety of balls, like a football, a bowling ball, basketball, etc. And so they play around with devices like an inflator or a baseball glove that would allow you to like interact with these balls for your benefit. And then a couple months into this version of the game, Nintendo brings the team at Rare what has been described in interviews as a really, really, really early version of Super Mario 64. And look, we've talked about this plenty, not with Ryan per se, so we can touch on it for a second. But Super Mario 64 was a historical moment for video game technology. It was like landing on the moon for us gamers. It was something the likes of which we'd never thought we'd see at that point. All fair statements, Ryan?
One other quick note for the group for the observant listener: I was on the Mario 64 episode.
Were you really?
I was.
Wow, my bad. Okay,
Ooh.
well, I don't. I botched that one every which way, didn't I?
Who's derailing what now?
Okay, you win. All right, so we've all talked about this before. It was like landing on the moon. Like all of us, they saw the future in Super Mario 64, and they realized that 3D platformers were going to be the next big thing. So they made the decision to officially move on from Project Dream, their pirate themed JRPG inspired role playing game, knowing that they wanted to move forward with a 3D platformer. So a new 3D engine was created, and work started on the game we know, Banjo and Kazooie, in March of 1997. Now, it's interesting to go back and look at interviews during and after this development process to kind of see how the game came along at that point. It was, after all, a moment of transition for the entire industry. And one of the things that this team felt as they were working on it was that Super Mario 64 had one foot in this era of platform gaming, being the new 3D era, and one foot in the past, specifically in terms of platforming itself. And what they go on to describe is that when they made the switch over to 3D platforming, it was clear that movement wasn't going to be as precise as it was in the 2D era as we worked through the concept of 3D movement and 3D cameras, right? And so one of their gripes with Super Mario 64 that they wanted to not do was they made a conscious decision to not force pixel perfect jumps. So, because of this, as they designed the levels, they chose level design that emphasized exploration and discovery instead of the platforming that, in all honesty, Super Mario 64 is really known for. They didn't want it. Fair statement. Do you think that the platforming in Mario 64 is problematic?
I mean, at the time, obviously it's unparalleled. Kind of with those rose-colored lenses.
Uh-huh.
But it's certainly surpassed by later games in that series. I mean, probably the camera was just the clunkiest aspect of the game, and it made
Well,
it
not
difficult.
that's where they went to.
Yeah,
I think that I'm just bad. I don't think the platforming's an issue. I'm just bad.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I'm always bad.
I'd agree. Like the platform in itself is solid. Just the camera just finagle. Needs a little bit more. You know, maintenance in terms of keeping it where you want to go. And yeah, it's definitely an improvement in how they handled it for the Banjo.
So this idea of exploration and discovery extended to, or is the reason for, an abundance of collectibles. They didn't just want to put collectibles in the game for the sake of having them. They wanted the shiny objects, so to speak, to have a purpose. And so we have the musical notes and the jigsaw pieces that are required to advance through the game. So, like I said, they designed the game first and foremost to reward players for exploration discovery.
There is so much to collect.
There's so much to collect, I read. Oh my goodness.
How much is there?
That's a great question. Ryan, how much is there?
Okay, well, every world has, I believe, 100 notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they are, literally 100 individual. Sometimes they're in like a set of three or five, but you need to, you know, transit the whole world to find them. Um, Obviously, all of the jigsaw pieces, as well as the rescuing the different color families of Jinjos. Um,
Excuse me?
Jinjos.
Okay. I'm
Do you know
carry
the
on.
Jinjos?
I do not. No.
Yeah, basically these different kind of colored goobers that are just hiding around, kind of hidden in the level. And you're rescuing them, presumptively. Uh, in the lore of the game, there are 10 families of Jinjos, each family being a different color, and so you're going. Part of it, if you're able to rescue the Jinjos, then great. There's a throwaway line in the game where the 10th family, the gray Jinjos, had been wiped out by the antagonist of the game, and I assumed that was a red herring, and we would find the gray Jinjos if you collected all of the other Jinjos. Wrong. The gray Jinjos are dead. This is a family game.
That must have been so disappointing for you as a child.
Disappointed is the right word. I was hoping, for some kind of little little tickle there for doing all the work.
I understand that. Before we move on, I do want to talk about some interesting ideas that were scrapped during development. They had, for instance, originally planned a multiplayer mode, and they weren't able to include it due to time constraints. But one of the more interesting ideas that didn't make it was a feature called Stop and Swop.
Stop and swap. What's that, Dave?
Ooh, I'm glad you asked, Ryan. While developing on the Nintendo 64, they learned that the console retained flash memory for several seconds after the cartridge was removed. And so they designed a feature where you could remove one cartridge, then quickly insert another, and that would allow you to unlock bonus content. And as they planned this feature out, they intended it to work with a bunch of games, including Donkey Kong 64, Jet Force Gemini, Banjo-Tooie, which is the sequel we'll get to, Perfect Dark, and Conker's Bad Fur Day. But when Rare submitted Donkey Kong 64, Nintendo asked them to remove the feature because they were concerned that the console wouldn't retain the memory for long enough and that the feature could potentially damage consoles because people would be racing to take a cartridge out, slam a cartridge in time, you know? And so Rare took it out. Easy peasy. It's a good thing too because as Nintendo continued to produce Nintendo 64 consoles and improve the production process, the amount of time that flash memory actually did retain memory became smaller and smaller, and so at some point the newer consoles wouldn't have been able to support that feature in any way, shape, or form.
I remember that being, kind of that feature being previewed in like magazines, like Nintendo Power,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's probably why there's at least a fair amount of information about it. Now wasn't something that they hid. It just ended up getting cut.
I mean, I can see why they cut it. I'd be the one taking the cartridge out and slamming the new one in to get it in time.
Oh yeah,
You know, I absolutely can see why they took it out. So, it was June of 1997 when the world saw the first working version of Banjo-Kazooie at E3, and it was given a release date of November of 1997. They missed that deadline in order to take more time polishing the game, but they eventually got there, and the game was released to the world on June 29th, 1998. I would like to point out, though, as Ryan so aptly reminded me before we got on here too, that Banjo himself did actually make the November 1997 deadline. And why is that, Ryan?
he was a featured racer
He was a featured racer in what game?
in acclaimed, rare developed uh, Mario Kart 64 knockoff Diddy Kong Racing.
Absolutely. So in November of 1997, the month that Banjo-Kazooie was supposed to release, Rare did release Diddy Kong Racing, and they wanted the game to kind of showcase Rare characters, and that the team really genuinely liked Banjo the Bear, so he was added in Diddy Kong Racing as a choosable racer. Absolutely.
Along with other favorites such as Conquer the Squirrel
Mm-hmm. That is correct.
and Tip Tup the Turtle.
Diddy Kong,
Oh
Donkey
yeah,
Kong,
oh yeah.
Scrappy Kong, lots of them. You know, Rob, Rare's journey from an RPG about a boy and some pirates to one of the greatest 3D platformers of all time is kind of amazing. Every time they pivoted, whether it was to pirates, to a bear, or finally into a bear in full 3D, they just kept leveling up.
You got that right. And you have to respect the way they weren't afraid to toss ideas out if they didn't feel right. I mean, scrapping Project Dream and starting over in 3D, now that's a bold move, but it paid off big time.
Absolutely. And if you've ever had an idea you wanted to reshape, rework, or completely reinvent, podcasting is a great way to get that creativity out. And with Zencaster, bringing your ideas to life has never been easier.
All right, I love my tools. So, what makes Zencaster stand out as a tool?
Well, Zencaster is an all in one podcasting platform that lets you record high quality audio and video straight from your browser. No fancy gear, no complicated setup, just hit record and you're off.
That sounds a little easier than reverse engineering the Famicom, that's for sure.
Way easier. And when you're done recording, Zencaster takes care of the post production too, balancing audio, reducing noise, even removing filler words. It's like having your own Rare development team behind the scenes polishing your work.
Okay, but once you've got it all polished up and you're ready to release your masterpiece out to the world, how do you do it?
Well, Zencaster's got you covered there too. You can publish directly to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the major platforms without ever leaving the dashboard.
Well, now that just sounds too perfect. So tell me, how can we get started?
Just head over to zencaster.com/pricing, use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencastr paid plan. Whether you're starting fresh or leveling up your podcast, Zencastr gives you the power to create.
And listeners, if you've got a story to tell, a deep dive, or even just a nostalgic trip through gaming history in mind, remember that Zencastr can help you bring it to life.
All right. Let's get back to Banjo-Kazooie, a game that didn't just follow in Mario's footsteps. As it was so aptly pointed out in the beginning, it blazed its own trail in 3D platforming. So when Banjo-Kazooie was released in June of 1998, it was really well received by both critics and gamers alike. Critics almost universally loved it. It still sits at a 92 aggregated score on Metacritic. It topped at the UK charts, made top 10 in Japan, and at the moment, sales of the game have exceeded 3 million copies. It is not a slouch by any stretch of the imagination, right?
You know, when I look at Rare's output in the latter half of the '90s, it is insane.
I know.
Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3, back to back to back years, 94, 95, 96.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, they're putting out the Killer Instinct franchise.
Mm-hmm.
1997, GoldenEye 007, Diddy Kong Racing, as you mentioned earlier. 98, Banjo-Kazooie. All of these games are just straight up bangers. There's other games, mixed in there that, are still beloved. Blast Corps,
Blast
uh,
Corps was so good.
Jet Force Gemini the following year in 1999,
Oh,
followed
so
by
good.
Donkey Kong 64. The next year, Perfect Dark, which we've had an episode about. Just unparalleled, just like, it was like the 90s Bulls of game development.
The success of Banjo-Kazooie, it would lead to sequels developed by Rare in the Banjo-Kazooie series, right? In 2000, they released Banjo-Tooie, which very much plays like Banjo-Kazooie, but with the difficulty turned up a bit. And then they continue the series on handheld platforms, making 2 games for the Game Boy Advance. In 2003, they make Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge, another platformer. And in 2005, they turned what was planned as a sequel to Diddy Kong Racing into a banjo-themed racing game called Banjo Pilot for the Game Boy Advance.
Oh, I completely forgot about that
About
until.
Banjo Pilot?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Such a weird game. Banjo-themed racing game. They raced in banjos. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up that Rare produced all those bangers at the end of the 90s into 2000 because it made them a studio with a really impressive portfolio. There are very few studios that have that much of a consistent track record as Rare did. So, in the early 2000s, when Microsoft decided to dip its toes into the software side of things, and they made their Microsoft Xbox Game Studios, and they started to look at studios that they wanted to bring into the fold, this was one of them, right? We've talked about others. Bungie was brought in while they were making Halo, and Halo became an Xbox game. It was originally an Apple Macintosh game, weird enough. Rare became a Microsoft studio, a first party development studio for the Microsoft Xbox in 2002 as a result of that track record. No doubt. It was a great investment. I don't know if it panned out for us, but probably a great investment on Microsoft's part just to just have the pedigree in their studio, you know? So in 2008, that team develops and releases Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts for the Xbox 360. That is a very controversial entry in the series. Have either of you played that one?
I have 100%ed Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie. I believe I played Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts for 30 minutes, an hour.
Yeah, exactly. It's really a controversial entry in the series because the gameplay hinges on vehicle construction. And the player basically has to design various vehicles, probably like trail makers, Rob.
That's exactly what I was just thinking. I'm like, hey, I
Yeah,
actually might be into that.
yeah. And they use the vehicles to complete challenges across the various worlds. And on top of that, that development team took the opportunity to completely change the visual style too, since they were developing on a new platform. Critics didn't hate it. It sits at a 79 on Metacritic, but players were really, really polarized about the gameplay and the art changes. It did not do well commercially. In its first month, it only sold 140,000 copies. Now, to put that in perspective, it came out alongside Fable 2, another Microsoft title, and in that same time period, it sold 1.2 million copies. So 1/10 of what Fable 2 did.
Damn.
So, I guess with that being said, it's not really surprising that Rare and Microsoft haven't particularly considered any further games in the series. I will say, though, to that point, that as they were working on Nuts and Bolts, Microsoft hired another development studio called 4J Studios to create an updated Xbox Live version of the original Banjo Kazooie. It updated the game to 1080p resolution, it updated the sound, it smoothed out the frame rates, and it just generally brought the game into the modern age. It even added back the Stop and Swap feature by letting the game unlock features in Nuts and Bolts, and later on what became a remade version of the sequel Banjo-Tooie. Now, despite there being no entries in the Banjo-Kazooie series since 2008's Nuts and Bolts, the spirit of Banjo has not left this world. In 2014, a group of developers left Rare and they founded Playtonic Games. And I will leave its entire story for another time. But what is important today is to know that they developed a spiritual successor to Banjo Kazooie, and that would be 2017's Ukulele. They followed that up in 2019 with Ukulele and the Impossible Lair. And I'm not even joking when I say this, but they are currently working on a comprehensive remake of the first game, and they're calling it Yuka Replayly.
Nice.
Fantastic pun.
I know. I had to look it up, and then I had to look up news articles to see if it was correct because it's so good. Yuka Replayly. Oh my goodness.
Even the original, it's like, oh, it's it's a great play on words with
It
kind of
is.
in the spiritual successor kind of idea.
It is. They did a fantastic job. So, needless to say, the spirit of Banjo Kazooie lives on. It does. So,
There's one other area where Banjo lives on these days
and that is,
in Super Smash Brothers.
that's a valid point. I didn't think about that. Is he a good character? I
He
don't know here.
is okay. I don't know. It's not my favorite character, but I enjoy his presence there, and and maybe playing against him more than playing as that character.
So you can play as him.
Banjo Kazooie together, yes. My not so hot take is that Banjo Tooie is the better game, but with worse performance, at least on the originally released N64.
I
Uh,
believe that. I
I,
believe
I
that.
For reference, as far as the Smash conversation,
Yeah.
Banjo is C tier.
C tier. Okay.
So, it's a fun character, but I hope
Mid.
you're not looking to win a whole lot.
Completely mid. Is he even mid?
Well, it's from S to E, so I'll let you decide on that. But fun.
Ryan, Was the assessment that Banjo-Tooie was a harder version of Banjo-Kazooie fair?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there are something, the level and the music in both games are phenomenal. Tui does step it up a notch. One thing that they pull back a little bit on is some of the collecting aspects. There's still certainly a lot to collect in Banjo Tooie, but they have a little bit of mercy on the players, and so it's a little bit easier to get everything collected.
Awesome. All
So
right.
the collectathon went down, but so did the frame rate, essentially.
So, as Ryan so aptly put it, Rare threw out a lot of bangers in this time period. We have in the past talked about GoldenEye, we've talked about Perfect Dark, we've talked about Donkey Kong Country. These are all other episodes that you can find in our archives. And of course, our archives can be found on our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people find on our website?
You can find a calendar of our future episode topics, get an idea of what we are going to be talking about in upcoming weeks. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with us about episode topics or video game related topics, or, whatever. We're kind of lonely over there, so come join us and have fun. You can find links to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to ad-free and unedited versions of our podcast. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor. Ryan is not out there, so good luck finding him. And Dave, he's wrong.
I am. I can be found on various platforms as David is wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. This week, of course, we are covering the story of Banjo-Kazooie, a bear, a bird, and a classic. Each week, when we sit down to do our research on these stories, we learn things. That's the best part of what we do week after week after week. And every time when I learn something new, I get so excited to be able to sit down and teach all of you these new things too. It's this fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching. And in celebration, we like to talk about our takeaways each week. I will start with you, Ryan. What did you learn today?
I did not have the connection with Project Dream, and you're talking a lot about pirates and stuff, and that made me think of Rare's much later release Sea of Thieves, which I'm sure is
They brought the
totally
pirate theme back.
totally full circle there. Yeah.
I forgot that was a Rare title. Holy shit.
One of their project leads at the time was a big pirate fan. He loved the golden age of piracy, and that is reflected in Diddy Kong Country 2. That is reflected in Project Dream. And yes, they revisited it many, many years later with Sea of Thieves. They finally got back to their pirate game.
Don't forget the Diddy Kong Country television show.
There's a Diddy Kong Country television show?
Yeah, Dave, come on. Know your history.
I just learned something new. Rob, what'd you learn today?
Well, I think my favorite thing is, although it didn't come to fruition necessarily when the game released, the thought of the Stop and Swap is pretty freaking awesome.
It is.
It's one of those things you don't really think about, like, oh, hey, you take the cartridge out during the game and you can suddenly do something else. It's always been like very taboo. Don't take it out. It's going to corrupt everything. But they were trying to make it a thing, and that's like, hey, that's pretty freaking cool. And it's cool that they were actually able to make it work later on with Newts and Boots.
And really, that reminds me of when they were making Perfect Dark, and they were experimenting with that face mapping technology with the Game Boy camera.
Yep, absolutely. Good callback.
A
Great
lot of
callback, actually.
a lot of big swings out of Rare.
Indeed. What about yourself, Dave? Huh?
I am most fascinated by the origin specifically of Banjo himself, that he was just a minor character in a swashbuckling role playing game, and somehow that became he was liked well enough to become the main character in a beloved series, no less. That is quite a trajectory, you know? When Rare released Rare Replay in, I don't know when they did it. It was probably a decade ago or so. A lot of these
20,
games, what's that?
2015.
2015. There you go. A decade ago. See? Oh, these games are on it. Conquer, Kazooie, uh, Tui. These games are on Rare Replay, and one of the nice things about Rare Replay is it included, interviews and behind the scenes content, and that's what I was able to grab onto, because there's actually video of Project Dream and interviews from the team who talk about how they built Project Dream out, from the development process of Project Dream, and then how it slowly transitioned into Banjo-Kazooie. And I think one of my favorite things was when they were going through other characters. Before they settled on Banjo the Bear, they had a rabbit character, and they joked for a brief moment in time this was almost going to be Bunny Kazooie. It's like, ooh, glad it wasn't.
I
So,
like that the game title kind of just, it's like you wake up and you realize you haven't done your homework, and the teacher's like, "What's the name of your game?" And you're looking around and you
mhm.
see, oh, over there on the wall there's a banjo, and what's that? Oh, it's a kazoo. It's like, it's Banjo Kazoo E.
Right. Well, and it's so cool that it started there, right? It's a musical theme through and through. You got to collect the musical notes, and so Banjo Kazooie collects the musical notes, and I really like how they just took that theme and they leaned into it, because really it was just Banjo the Bear. It literally started with Banjo the Bear, who was a minor character in a role playing title, and it turned into something so much more. And I love that trajectory every day. So I'm here for it. All right. Well, that, my friends, is the story of Banjo Kazooie. Lots to digest there. But yeah. So before we take it into next week, gentlemen, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode? Rob?
Oh, I gotta start with me, huh?
Yep.
Well, I will say for one quick moment, thank you, Ryan, for joining us. It's always a pleasure, and you are always welcome. So thank you for continuing to help, because sometimes I just can't handle Dave by myself.
I completely understand.
Yeah, me
I'm
too.
glad. And also thank you to all of our listeners. It means the world to us that all 12 of you are listening, and we hope you continue to enjoy.
Ryan, how about you?
I'm just happy to be here. Happy to talk about video games, and uh, yeah,
Me
living
too.
the dream.
We're happy to have you.
Thank you.
We've now had you for a few episodes. It's been nice. It's nice having someone under the Rob to talk to. That was the other end of the same joke. I'm sorry, Rob.
No, you're not.
I'm not.
I mean, maybe for stealing my joke because you're bad at joking, but you know.
As we pack away Banjo's backpack and say goodbye to Kazooie's witty quips, we're reminded of how Banjo Kazooie charmed players with its humor, creativity, and expansive worlds. Rare's beloved platformer remains a shining example of what makes gaming joyful. So whether you're solving puzzles or flapping through challenges, always remember the magic of a bear and bird duo. Next week, though, we are setting aside the charming whimsy of Banjo Kazooie to venture into the gravity defying depths of Prey. This ambitious first person shooter follows Tommy, a Cherokee man navigating an alien spaceship filled with portals, mind bending mechanics, and spiritual abilities. With its innovative gameplay and deeply personal narrative, Prey pushed the boundaries of what a shooter could be. Join us next week as we explore the development and legacy of this unforgettable title on next week's extraterrestrial trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Doop doo a doop da doo wa da doo da.
We've got to get on the same page.
No, you'll just edit it to where mine comes and then his ends it.
Just
Perfect.
perfect. Done.